Welcome everyone to episode 27 of the Exoskeletons and Wearable Robotics podcast with Professor Thomas Sugar from the Wearable Robotics Association, or WRA, and me, Bobby Marinov, from the Exoskeleton Report. And we have a special guest with us today, Greg Galarneau. Greg, how do you say your last name?
Galarneau, and I've heard it pronounced every which way, so I'm all good with it.
Just like my name, I've heard it pronounced many different ways. Greg is the founder of the Exoskeleton Store, which is currently the biggest distributor of exoskeleton technology for North America. And we are very happy to have him here on the heels of our podcast with Stanley that gave us an overview of how occupational exoskeletons specifically being marketed and distributed in the UK and the Northwest European region. So if you haven't heard that episode, we encourage you to go and check that out too. Before we get started, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. So special thanks to our corporate level sponsors, Humotech, Oxivo, HeroWare, Digity, Hypershell, and Pertezo. Thank you so much. And to our VIP Patreon sponsors, Volker Bartenbach, Rita Vasquez Torres, Diego Herrera, Minmar, Carl Zelig, Sebastian Stassen, Super Essence, George Woodland, and Stefano Tuxiri. It's both a financial and moral support. If we have the opportunity, please support us on Patreon so we can make more episodes. And now let's get started. Greg, would you mind introducing yourself for our audience?
Yeah, thanks for that, Bobby. My name is Greg Galarneau, and really been operating this space for about 2 years. It's been a fun ride and really a nice opportunity to help folks and not only feed the family, but also feed the soul with what we do.
And Greg, how did you get started? How did you discover exoskeleton technology?
Yeah, it's a bit of a story, bit of a journey, but I devoted about 20 years of my career within industrial automation and robotics. We had a large focus on warehousing, manufacturing, and food processing facilities. So in my background, we would work with engineers to conceptualize custom packaging equipment, end of line equipment, and we needed to understand their specific processes. A lot of times what that would look like is the customer would give you a spec package and they would say, we have 13 beverage bottles coming down this line every minute. This is the footprint that we can work within. And these are the 100 different pack patterns that we need these placed in for retail sales. What can you offer? And so we would work with those engineers and then our engineers in the business we work with to help conceptualize a solution that would automate that end of line for them. What I would find is that oftentimes it was budget or lack of footprint available, and that would make these projects a non-start for the tasks which are left to be highly manual and repetitive. So that was my early career. And then years later, I finally made it to the ivory tower. Everything I'd ever been working for is COO of a manufacturing firm. And that's when I was really exposed to exoskeletons. I saw an immediate benefit to them and noticed that they would be a great opportunity to employ within our own facilities. And like most, I didn't have a good reference as to what 5 foot-pounds of support, 5 foot-pounds of torque would feel like under your arms. I got a little bit frustrated with trying to find pricing and trying to find everything that's available on the market. And ultimately, Bobby, I think that's what led me to the Exoskeleton Report. You've done such a good job of working with vendors of this technology and compiling everyone together that's really where a lot of my research took place. So using the Exoskeleton Report as well as some other avenues, created a business plan to understand what the market segmentation, the saturation, what the potential volumes would be to really maintain and create a viable business entity. I also wanted to know who the customers were, which companies were operating in the market. And when the business report and all that quantitative data made sense, I dove in head first. I'll be honest though, it wasn't until my very first customer purchased an upper body unit that I really understood the impact that these exoskeletons would have on people's lives. So that first customer when I talked to him, he owned a property maintenance company. And it's hard to talk about this and not get a little bit emotional. But this gentleman suffered from nerve damage in both of his shoulders. He'd exhausted all the options that he had surgically. And he told me that there were two remaining. He could sell his business or start a regimen of painkillers. And those aren't great options. And I recognize that there's a lot of folks like this person that are just trying to make a living. And unfortunately, they may have to do so by fighting through some of the pain that they endure. So I worked with him and basically said, hey, let me send this to you. All I want is your feedback. And if it doesn't work, no problem. Take 2 weeks and send it back. So when it was delivered, we had a quick fitment meeting virtually through Microsoft Teams. And I followed up with him 2 weeks later. We didn't want to be a pest to him, just wanted to understand his feedback without someone trying to control the narrative. And on that 2 week phone call, the gentleman got a little emotional, but the thing that really stuck with me is he said, this has changed my life. Previously, he couldn't work above chest level for more than 10 minutes before that pain was significant enough where he would be done for the rest of the day. And it was quickly after that that I realized my father could have benefited from something like this in the 80s. He was permanently disabled, back injury, and 5 kids. I just couldn't imagine what that would have been like for him. Growing up with it, it was something where it was just a way of life. But that was really the turning point for us. And one of the reasons that we have an e-commerce presence. Sometimes folks might be too proud. Maybe they don't want to talk to someone in order to get help. They just want to take the means into their own hands. So being able to work with corporate entities, the end users, it was very important to us. And that was the one thing, that whole situation there with my first customer, that really changed our mission for the company.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Tom, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I guess some of my questions would be, as a distributor, and do you sell mainly upper extremity systems, lower extremity systems? Kind of, I don't know if you could talk about some of the marketplace that you've seen over the last 2 years.
Absolutely. That's a great question, Tom. And really, it's our prerogative to offer technology for every body area that we can viably cover. It's important to us, though, to work with companies who have a product that has been on the market for some time. It's got good data behind it and it's well received. So we don't offer just anything. We don't offer anything that we ourselves wouldn't wear. But it's not only the body area, it's also the tasks that folks are looking to do. I don't believe that there's any one exoskeleton that does everything well. So we really take it upon ourselves to fit the right exosuit for the use case of the client.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's quite important. We've heard that from some others.
Well, can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that? Because going to conferences, going to events, I keep hearing this over and over again, that an exoskeleton was selected or a wearable robotic technology was selected. And then it turned out that it just wasn't the right application. It wasn't the right tool or the right solution for the task at hand.
Yeah, that's a great point. And from our perspective, it's important for people to be able to try these and put them on and see what they're about, and then try them out for a period of time with the opportunity to return it. As I mentioned earlier, it's hard for normal folks to read these clinical studies that have been put out and really make sense of them. Just like myself, what does 5 foot-pounds of support for your arms feel like? We just don't have a good frame of reference for that. So that's really where it comes into play. If we're working with 3 different back modules, companies that offer that solution, then giving these clients an opportunity to try them all and see what works best is the way to go. And from that, we really dive in initially with the project discovery to recommend the exoskeleton that stands the highest degree of likelihood of meeting their expectations. But a lot of times, folks, if they're not going to use a tool, then they shouldn't be stuck with it. So that's our whole reason that we run these 2-week no-cost beta tests.
So do you go on site with like 2 or 3 different, let's call them back exos, go on site with 2 or 3 back exos, work with the company, as you said, for a couple of weeks, kind of walk us through that. This might be an advantage of a distributor. Do you find a company might buy 5 of product A and 10 of product B, and then that's the final solution? Or, just kind of walk us through if I'm a small manufacturing business, and I've got 10 employees, how would you do it?
Sure. So typically with that initial project discovery, we'll always operate off of a Teams meeting. And videos are amazing. If you can watch a video of the process in question, then that's worth almost as much as any other viable means of getting that data. But you've also got to be willing to put on your clown makeup and do some dancing for the customer if they don't have a video available. So I will stand up on here and mimic the motion profiles that they're trying to describe, just to make sure that we are all on the same page. From there, we go on site frequently. I'm probably traveling between my business partner and I 3 weeks out of the month, visiting clients throughout the United States. And with that, then we bring in our entire product portfolio and we allow the team to put them on, try them out, get a feel for what every suit offers. Some are better for forward leaning, others are better for lifting, and some have that sweet spot right in the middle where they do work for forward leaning and lifting. So that's really what's important to us, allowing people to make their own decision as to what's going to work best for them. And to your point, we do. With larger corporations, we see that they'd like to standardize on one solution. It's the same way whether you're talking about industrial automation and packaging equipment. When they select a vendor, somebody that they like to work with, then it's easier. And oftentimes they get better pricing if they can offer one solution. So within large conglomerates, that's what we see. With smaller and medium-sized businesses of maybe 10 folks, it's much more personal preference. With shoulder straps, we have some clients who may have a pacemaker and the shoulder straps can aggravate that. So there's other suits out there that maybe encapsulate more of the bust to help distribute that load as opposed to shoulder straps. And it's different from everybody. I always like to use an analogy where if a company came out with uniforms, about 60% of the population would just be glad they didn't have to wear their own clothes. There's 30% of that population that maybe they'll wear them, but they don't like the texture, the color, the fit, the feel. And then 10% of that company just says, no way. It doesn't matter if it's made out of silk and gold thread. They just don't want anything to do with it. And I see that with an exoskeletons as well.
Wow, thank you so much for bringing that up because we have seen it in scientific papers on the adoption of exoskeletons and how people react to it. And it seems to be, for years now, we've seen these numbers where it seems to be like a group of people that, similar to learning to ride a bicycle, there's just some people that just struggle with it. It's really fascinating. So you've done like 2 decades implementing automation solutions, right?
Yep, that's correct.
So based on that, where would you say is the biggest difference between trying to implement an exoskeleton solution compared to that?
Sure. With an industrial automation project, a lot of times that is taken out of the hands of the associates who that automation may be replacing, understandably so. Whereas with an exoskeleton, they are very much in tune with the company and providing that qualitative feedback that the company needs as to whether are these comfortable, is it increasing heat stress? Would you wear this every day with what you do? So I would say that from an exoskeleton integration standpoint, the person who's wearing it has much more of an opportunity to provide feedback as to which suit they will ultimately decide on.
Fascinating. So then, what advice could you give to a small business, it's like a family business that's discovering wearable technology for the first time?
That's a great question. I would encourage them to try it. Just try it before you buy it. Understand what is your motivation and what's the need for looking at exploring this. And ultimately, by answering that question, you'll find that it leads you toward one suit over another. I would also venture to say that there has to be a need. And I know that this was echoed by others on your podcast, but the customers who really take to these immediately are the ones who are trying to better serve themselves, offset pain or fatigue from an application that they're performing repetitively. And they see the need, they feel the need for something to help them out versus perhaps a company telling 100 of their employees, hey, there's this thing, it works great. It's going to give you 40 pounds of lifting assistance and you're expected to wear it when you do this job. And I take myself, I started off my career in warehousing and picking orders. When I was 20 years old, if someone told me, hey, you're going to wear this device along with your fall harness while you do this job, kind of look at them and say, hey, I was an all-star football player. I'm doing this job to stay in shape. I don't need this. But unfortunately, I see it on the other end too, where a person may be working in this capacity for 40 years. They're a couple years away from retirement. And they say, hey, I've done it this way my entire career. I'm not ready to change now. And oftentimes that's the saddest part of this job is that you see folks that these could really benefit, although they might be the most reluctant to change.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've talked about that, which is on some of the podcasts where it's a piece of clothing. It's something you have to wear. And I really liked your analogy today where you said, you could have silk clothing and they still, maybe not interested, but yeah. So I guess a question for me, I'm just thinking could you maybe don't tell us a company per se or a product, but could you tell us maybe a couple success stories where you're like, wow, I went in here and they had, a certain task. And then I don't know, maybe 6 months later, you've talked to that customer and they've said, hey, we're still using the devices. We like them. And, and this is, how it's going.
Sure. There's one company that immediately comes to mind, and they've actually won a Theo award in 2025. So very impressive. But part of them winning that award was their implementation of exoskeletons within their work group. So when they reached out, we had that initial virtual consult that we do with every client, and we understood their needs. This particular customer had the decision makers, the right people, the right people in the room to talk to and understand their needs, what they were looking for. And with that, we embarked on a 2-month trial of the exoskeletons before they were committing to rolling them out. I saw the opportunity and really the passion within their human resources director who was championing this project. And so we were happy to accommodate their specific needs with that. After the 2-month trial, they saw that the suits worked. They'd read the studies beforehand, but again, they didn't understand what to expect. Mm-hmm. So within about 8 months of them using those suits, they did receive that Theo award, in addition to outfitting additional associates at their facility with these devices. And they do something that is a little bit unique that you don't see very often now. They've had such success with these in their process that they are actually employing them now as training devices for new hires to help protect these people as their bodies become acclimated to these new tasks, which they may not be used to doing.
So I have 2 follow-up questions for you then. First of all, what is the Theo Award?
Sure. That's a good question, Bobby. I hadn't heard of that previously, but it's an award for companies within workers' comp and companies who really take a proactive approach to safety within their environment.
Fascinating. Well, congratulations to them for getting that.
Is it an award from an organization like a National Safety Council, or is it an award from an insurance company?
Yeah, actually, it's the Risk and Insurance Company. They're affiliated with the Institute. So pretty impressive and pretty prestigious award for folks.
Oh, wow.
Fascinating. And then my other follow-up question is, you said the right people, and we've seen even academic research papers on who are the right people. We talked about a small family business, but a large company can have human resource. They can have a health and safety team that is separate. There can be a manufacturing engineering team that is separate. There could be the finance team. There could be the leads on the floor. There can be the management team. There can be the upper management corporate team. So who are the right people that you talk to?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And really, it depends on the company. With that specific golden project I just talked about, that was being run out of their HR team. And as you mentioned, there's so many others that have a stake and a hand within these projects that the right people is dependent on the company. and what their motivations are for implementing these exoskeletons. A lot of times what we see is the HR maybe looking at it from a perspective of safety, not only safety, but employee turnover as well. Are folks getting too fatigued where they're calling in sick the next day or just resigning? Production and floor management, they care about productivity. They're the boots on the ground who see that fatigue, who see that injury risk within their associates. And then you've got the decision makers, the folks who were at the corporate level and trying to justify this project. I truly believe the right people isn't necessarily a title. I think the right people comes down to their desire to enrich the lives of the people that work for them. And really, if they're starting the project off with the right motivations, then that leads to success, not a type.
Thanks for that answer. And I just want to highlight to everyone, if you didn't catch it, note how Greg started going into key performance indicators. Every team has their KPIs that they look out for, and how exoskeleton technology may or may not impact the KPIs that they care about. And I think overarching, that is still, how to say it, work in progress for the occupational exoskeleton industry to really nail down what is the positive impact on KPIs when occupational exoskeletons get successfully integrated into a production line.
That's a great point, Bobby. And in talking about integration, there's 12 principles of project management. And I think integration of exoskeletons can follow that roadmap. They don't need to be their own use case to be integrated. But there's really, in my mind, 6 important facets of those principles. And one of those is the fact that you have to show value, and whether that value is aligned with your business objectives and what the intended benefits are. So will they meet your expectations? And then from there, you have to be able to be adaptable and resilient, because no project goes off without a hitch. Also, speaking to the KPIs, those should be provided to everybody who's piloting the project so that they can see for themselves. Maybe they, like any good safety project, let's take safety glasses for an example. If they're working, you don't realize that they are, per se. And so with an exoskeleton, if it's doing its job to keep you safe, you may not recognize it, but I see that. So providing those KPIs and that data to the associates as well allows them to see if they are performance-based for their paycheck, potentially a 6 to 8% increase in productivity, they just received a raise. So it's important to notify everybody about those. And I think that lends itself well to good project management.
Tom, any thoughts?
Yeah. No, it's quite interesting. Again, I guess I'm thinking about success stories. So you've been at this 2 years. Have you had some companies come back to you and say, like, hey, we're going to continuously use these devices, over a multi-year period?
Yeah, of course. We certainly wouldn't be in business today if that didn't happen.
Good.
Yeah. So that's what we go for. I mean, if that's the golden ticket,
Right.
but we always do tell our customers, I don't care if you buy 1 or 100 of these. If I can help one person, then I've done my job. And there's a lot of good to speak to, but there's also the projects that go awry, the ones that don't work out, that 2-week beta test where the suits are coming back. And that's okay. At the end of the day, if it doesn't fit that company's business processes, the values, the expectations of the people that are going to wear them, we don't ever want to place an exoskeleton where it's not going to provide benefit.
Are there any so we have heard a lot of horror stories over the years, just like meeting in the community. Closets full of exoskeletons would be one famous line, which is like, well, occupational exoskeletons were purchased and no one's using them. We've heard horror stories of occupational exoskeletons being purchased and then the people leave within the company, so they're no longer being repaired or maintained, or their use being tracked at all. Do you have like a cautionary horror story, or like lesson learned, or like, haha, wish I did this already different?
Yeah, this company was built on lessons learned. So, you can't grow unless you make mistakes and you learn from them. So it's important for us to do that. What we initially started out with, our assumptions at first with the business, we're wildly different today than we were 2 years ago. In terms of horror stories and cautionary tales for other folks who might be considering this, I would say that a lot of times you might have folks that reach out who aren't necessarily serious about integrating these at all. It could potentially be a new safety person at a company and they're looking to justify their worth because, as I mentioned earlier, if safety is doing its job, people might not realize it. So a lot of times when that injury happens, then that's really where the spotlight gets put on safety, unfortunately. So you might, as an integrator, as a vendor, as a company that's helping to fit these into the right place within the company, you might get someone who reaches out and says, "Hey, come visit our site. We have 5,000 employees, and I think we do a lot of repetitive motions, and this is a good fit. We're having a safety show, and you could set up a booth, and people could be allowed to try it." And so you go and you do the song and dance and find out later there was never an intent to really launch these. That's extremely frustrating from both the standpoint of the business and the investment you put in and time and capital to go out and do that. But also it's disappointing because you see the folks that do put it on and they ask, "Hey, can I go wear this at my station?" You know, that they really see a benefit of it and it doesn't come to fruition. So I would say that a personal one for the business, that's one that is unfortunate. Other cautionary tales, you know, with integrating the exoskeletons, if they're not following those tenets of project management, one being looping in all the stakeholders and getting buy-in from that, whether it's the decision makers or the associates or the safety team or the floor managers, then a lot of times the teams can feel that this project is being pushed down upon them and that they don't have a say in what's going to happen. And when people wear something on their body, there's a lot of feelings around that. You know, I used the uniform example earlier, but people express themselves with what they wear. And so it's a very personal decision. And the easiest products come from the ground up. Whereas if it's being pushed down on somebody, they don't understand the benefit or what they're going to receive. Those are the projects that stand a high likelihood of failure.
Fascinating. Wow. Thanks. Thanks for touching on that.
I was just thinking about your ground up idea. Have you ever had an employee come to you directly and say, "Hey, I'd like to try this out"? Then the employee wears the device for personal reasons, and then that got the company interested into Exos. You know what I mean? So it's almost the, ground, like, do you sell to individual people as a distributor? Or I guess that's my question. Do you sell to individual people as a distributor, or do you typically go and try to sell the fives, the tens to a company?
Sure. I would define the early days of this industry as people hunting elephants. You know, they're going after those 3-digit orders and the companies that can support them.
Right.
So per my introduction, it was important for us to have an e-commerce channel for the individuals that want to just get on and buy these and own their own solution. Off the top of my head though, Tom, I can't think of any instance where I've had an individual purchase this on their own accord and then the company adopt it thereafter.
Mhm.
A lot of times the folks that get on and purchase an exoskeleton for their own benefit, they're doing it for their own benefit without necessarily a motivation to incorporate it to the rest of their company.
Right. I wonder if you could touch on this because this was a thought. I liked exactly what you said. So see if you could touch on it a bit. Hunting elephants. So as an industry and as an association, Bobby's smiling because
I'm smiling. I know where this is going.
right. So we as an industry and an association, let's say from 2016 to 2019 had those, and especially 2019 being the glory days, where we saw, like, we thought we could get mass adoption of industrial or occupational exoskeletons, whichever you'd like to call it. And then obviously COVID hit and things went sideways a bit, but still the idea was to go after the large companies, right? The large warehousing companies. And we could name, some like anyway, like a UPS or a FedEx or something like that. But as an industry, we didn't see large mass adoptions. Now I could be wrong, and so please tell me that I'm, and others, I know other companies will talk about their success stories too. I mean, some of it's getting out there on LinkedIn, which is absolutely fabulous. But just what's your thoughts about hunting elephants versus, hey, maybe there's a lot more success, the 50-person manufacturing companies, that kind of a thing.
Sure. With those elephants, as we're calling them, the whole sales cycle is elongated. The amount of channels that approvals have to go through is significant. And so we see those projects as being a lot of time investment, but it's also, you're talking to the corporate entity a lot of times with these, where if things go perfectly, then all of a sudden these suits can trickle down to all of their locations. And so I can see the desire within doing that. But with 2 years of doing business and over 250 customers, we've really found the companies that like to employ this technology, that see the need, are the mom and pop companies that have 50 employees or less. Because I think that the decision makers, the people that are running the company, they have more of a focus on a family business and seeing their employees, whether in stress or fatigue, pain, then they're more likely to implement that because they have a 10-foot view of it as opposed to a 30,000-foot.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think the bigger thing that we saw with some of the larger corporations, and it's not anyone's fault or anything, it's hard to get the buy-in through all of the stakeholders, as Bobby listed about, 10 or 15 stakeholders. And then the second thing we've seen is a lot of times is when a person leaves, the person was, and you saw this, I've seen this in some of the work I've done. When the champion leaves the corporation, then the longevity of the project stops, in that sense.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Having the right project champion is paramount because that's the person that can push this along, encourage the associates to continue wearing them, to see the benefit. But yeah, with folks retiring, resigning, leaving their position, a lot of times we find that this technology can fall through the gaps. I see it on other ends as well with integrating the exoskeletons with the person who's testing it. We don't want the person who's already sold on this because they think that they're going to look like Tom Cruise on the edge of tomorrow. We also don't want the people on the other end of the spectrum that are not going to adopt this no matter what. So we like to find that tester who's right there in the middle, and they provide the most unbiased feedback. They're not swayed early and they're not adverse to change. So with that, we see that as well, that there's multiple ways to keep these projects going, but there can also be assumed leaders, usually an associate who's been in the position for 10, 15 years, and people look up to them for their advice. If that person, even though they're not in an appointed leadership role, but if that person takes to these and encourages other folks and talks about internally how it's benefiting them, we see that even though that project champion may be leaving, that folks are more likely to keep wearing the exoskeletons. But again, it's really, I think, culture of the company and the environment by which these are being used.
Can you touch more on this topic on culture? So we've seen in countries like Japan where there's an aging population and the average age of the workforce keeps increasing, where the reported numbers of occupational exoskeleton sales appear to be pretty high. They have companies, there seems to be government involvement and subsidies. So it seems culturally in countries like Japan, there's, a pressure that's naturally pushing for the search for technology to allow people who are getting older and physically weaker, or for new people that want to get into jobs that are not as high end or sexy, like logistics or being a post office worker that's sorting mail. It seems that they have found the niche for occupational exoskeletons and for growth. In West Europe, we keep hearing stories how when a company hires an employee, they won't have one insurance that they have to pay. They might have 2, 3, 4 even. So then they have a acute financial interest in making sure that no employee gets injured while working for a company. And the company is also motivated to be able to demonstrate that they are always investigating what is the best way to do manual labor and physical work for their people. North America, in our variant of capitalism, has a little bit of a different cultural perception.
Yeah, I think with both of those examples you gave, Bobby, you demonstrated the need. And so in Japan, it's the aging workforce that's driving this change from a government level. And in Europe, it seems to be the insurance companies that are driving this change. Here in the United States, in my opinion, I don't think that these are as widely adopted yet, just because it's not in people's purview. It's not been widely marketed. There are companies here in the last year and a half that have come out with devices and they have 20,000 units on the market because they've understood the marketing and really what it takes to get people excited about it. And I think once that happens, then we'll see much more adoption, much more interest. But I do see it increasing and it's exciting. And as much as it is cultural, I just think it's more awareness here in the United States. In talking with my vendors who are located in Asia and Europe, they're in a segment of the life cycle of a business where the market's mature versus here in the United States where it's very much in its infancy. So I see a lot of good possibilities, but there are also barriers to entry here in North America that I think have stopped folks from really pursuing a line of business within this segment.
Could you talk, interesting, could you talk a little bit about maybe some of the tasks that you've seen that work well? Like, I'll give you an example. In the exo workathlons, they're thinking about some logistics tasks. They're thinking about welding. They're thinking about overhead work. Like, let's say you're putting sprinkler heads in the system. Could you talk about maybe, I don't know, just 3 or 4 tasks or 3 or 4 jobs that really have, you've seen success?
Sure. You've hit on a couple of them already. Welding is one of those trades that is high in demand, but it can also be high stress on the body because of the awkward positions that these folks might be in. The fact that they're holding on to a welding torch for long periods of time. We see high instances of carpal tunnel.
Right.
But really within that, welding is a great use case because the people that are doing the work are oftentimes the ones who are asking for change. And it's not always the exoskeleton that's the best opportunity for change to help affect their life. There are other ergonomic tools that should be investigated alongside exoskeletons and that may prove more efficacy than the suit itself. So I think it's important to always be upfront about that as well. If you see an opportunity where a company should maybe change the height of a conveyor, add a lift table, being upfront about them with that, even though your business stands on placing exoskeletons, it's important to show that kind of integrity. I don't ever want to place a suit at the cost of my integrity. It's important to lay your head on your pillow at night with a clear conscience. And so, yeah, that's what we're founded on.
Yeah, we heard that loud and clear from the Stanley episode, and that what they really wanted to do was to make sure that they had the best exo product. Didn't matter what manufacturer, but the best exo product for the task. We heard that, and it also gets back to we've heard our friend Urs Schneider from the Fraunhofer Institute. He's got a team of engineers and ergonomists, and they see exoskeletons as one piece. Right. And they'll talk about exactly what you said about changing the work environment first, maybe before actually adding an exo in that sense. But I'll still push back a little bit, even on the welding. We were in Europe a couple of years ago, and there was an example where they were doing welding at a very large, like an organization that does railways or trains, that kind of thing. And they said they had trouble where some of the young, associates said, okay, we'll put on an exoskeleton because they were young. They actually trained with an exoskeleton with a VR AR system with the Exo Workathlon. But then when they got to the site, some of the older employees were making fun of them, like, oh, you're not strong enough. Why do you need an exo? Ha ha ha. But then, the younger people are looking at some of these older employees that are, frankly, their shoulders and arms are broken, and so how do we get across? How do we get past that? Do you think?
That what you just spoke to, I believe, is the reason that these suits aren't more widely adopted within the skilled trades. Having worked between semesters at college within concrete and, warehousing as well, there's proud people and there's a lot of ribbing that goes on. And so when you're exposed to that, who wants to be the first on the job site wearing something which really turns heads? And I think that that's a cultural shift that has to happen. The important thing with that is exposing the younger generation of workers to this technology so that hopefully as it adapts and they have a need for it, that they don't rib the younger folks that are coming in, the people that want to try something new. It takes a level of empathy as well. And, if you know that Bob over here is suffering from a bad back, a bad shoulder, and he walks in with something that's really getting benefit, if he has that need there, then he doesn't care what other people think. He wants to do his job, provide for his family, and come home healthy.
Right. Yeah, we had a long time ago, Bobby and I were working with some people and I had given a talk at a United Steelworkers, and they were really interested in exos because, if you work steel for 30 years, it's going to take a toll on the body. But the point was that we're getting at is a lot of these people want to retire with dignity, and right. And so they want to retire and they want to and have a really nice pension, but retire, and to be able to go golf or go to the swimming pool or go to the beach in Florida, or I don't know, I'm just making things up. But the point is, I think as an industry, we need to kind of push that a bit, exactly what you said, some of the skilled trades, proud people, but we've also got to say, hey, look, it's not just, exoskeleton. We called it worker wellness at the time. So we were saying there's exoskeletons you need for medical. If you had a spinal cord injury and you just have to have an exoskeleton, right, to get up out of the wheelchair. But also, what about just exoskeletons for worker wellness? And I think we need to kind of push that as a theme out there. And as you said, just more marketing. More marketing is not as a theme.
It's exactly what it is. It's gaining awareness of this, making people excited of it, letting them know the benefits that the suits provide in a format that they can understand. And I know I keep beating the drum of 5 foot-pounds of torque, or what does muscle deactivation feel like, or what does a 20% increase in endurance feel like after 8 hours? I use a lot of analogies because I like to make this subject matter expert easy for people to understand, easy to relate to. And one of those analogies is if I came to somebody with a bottle of 5-hour energy and said, hey, if you consume this, if you ingest it and put it in your person, you're going to have more energy. You'll do a better job. You'll be more focused. People are happy to pay $5 a day for a Monster Energy drink or something that's going to give them energy. But what if you could wear something that looks like a backpack? And by doing so, you're going to take less of a toll on your body and you're going to ultimately have more energy at the end of the day. And you don't have to do anything internally to do it. So oftentimes when I make that story relevant to somebody, an associate typically, they completely get it. And they say, yeah, I'm spending $5 a day. I'm buying the Monster. I'm drinking it. It's processed food. It's probably not good for me, but it gets me through the day. Yeah. So I think that that's a shift as well, helping people understand that type of thing.
No, that's a great story because I've seen some people working at my house, right? Let's say, palm tree trimming or block walls and things like that, being here in the desert. And I've seen people literally consume literally 3-4 Monster drinks in a day. And it's tough on the body, right? Because there's so much caffeine and sugar and whatever else is in those things. But yeah, people will do it. I mean, my brother always liked to kind of say that it's easy to sell aspirin, after my back is hurting. It's hard to sell vitamins. And that was, Phil Sugar used to say that with the exo industry, right? And we're trying to sell vitamins. We're trying to sell, hey, wear this device and it will help you over the long term. And so that's a story we've got to sell.
Yeah. That's what we echo as well. We would much rather prefer to use these preventatively than prescriptively. But a lot of times, and it's a great thing that insurance companies are getting the buy-in to help folks use these suits to return to work after an incident. And hopefully we can see a change there on the other end where there's, as you mentioned in Japan, there's subsidies. Hopefully we can see some of those happen here in the United States to make them more accessible for companies to at least pilot them and see if they fit their needs.
Yeah. There was one insurance company at one point a couple years back, just maybe 2 years back, that was going to help out with shoulder exoskeleton with some insurance monies at one point. So I always thought that was a turning point for the industry if we can start to get the insurance companies interested. And rightfully so. The good news is there is interest. There's an ASTM work group. Bobby, there's an ASTM work group. I'm trying to make sure I get the right name for it.
So in a nutshell, Greg, there were multiple attempts to get the US insurance companies interested through different meetings at WRA. There were meetings then, work group created at the ASTM to kind of like bring insurance companies and get them excited, get them educated on this. So I'm really happy that you touched upon this. I just met yesterday with another group that was thinking along the same lines of how do we get government excited in North America and the United States. And they were not, they're even thinking of like a specific focused application rather than trying to look at all of work and all of occupational exoskeletons. They've actually already zeroed it down to one point where they want to get started. Do you have any thoughts on this? Like how do we do this? How do we get subsidies for occupational exoskeletons in North America?
Yeah. Just taking a step back, I am proud to announce that we do work with a very large insurance company here in the United States. And it's being used with the suits prescriptively after somebody's injured to help them return to work. We have a handful of cases under our belt now where we've successfully implemented these for these types of users. And this company is taking it a step farther now where they're incorporating our exoskeleton portfolio within what they call their innovation lab. And so as they bring their clients through this innovation lab, they're going to have the opportunity to touch, test, feel, try all of these different exoskeletons out and ultimately see whether or not they're going to benefit the customer. So it's really exciting. The wheels are in motion, but it takes a little bit of time to accelerate, but it's happening. From the government level, I spent 2 years in business development for a company that was working within geographic information systems. And a lot of that type of work takes time, trying to find the right people who can push legislation that can get that out. Selling into the government, especially working with them, is worlds different than B2B or B2C business. So I would have to pull back on that question. I don't think the 2 years that I've spent in that industry is adequate enough to be able to speak intelligently about how that would need to happen.
Yeah, I think my only comment is I think some people confuse when I talk with them that something will need more time with yes, it needs time, but also there needs to be a push for it. Someone needs to be actively working on it. If all of us just waiting for more time to pass without anyone working on a solution, it's not going to materialize by itself out of thin air.
That's right. That's right. And ultimately, the theme that we keep touching on with this conversation is the need. And so I think that it's going to be a legislator or someone in the government who either has a personal need or sees the technology and, unfortunately, maybe in their family, they can see how this would help a family member. But they have to be, they have to have empathy toward the folks who this device can benefit. And then I really think that'll be the catalyst within the government that can help. But we need that project champion in the government, just like we would any other company that's going to integrate these.
Fascinating. What a great way to make a full circle back to the beginning. Totally. Then one other thought on my end is we keep hearing of this hierarchy of solutions. And you mentioned yourself, like you could use the lift table or you could raise the conveyor belt. rather than using an occupational exoskeleton. But I'm seeing more and more talk of not an or statement where we do this or we use a exo, but an and statement where we have this technology or that technology and it will pair really well with an occupational exo. Are you starting to see some of that on your end?
We are. And certainly companies have come so long in terms of such a long way in terms of ergonomics, where, for example, there's a company in Iowa that they have to pour in 50-pound bags of whey powder. And the bags being palletized are on a lift table. So when the product comes, it's ergonomically placed for them to take that device, the bag of product off of that lift table. But then they've still got to do the upper body motion of pouring it into a hopper. So that's a great example of how exoskeletons are being combined with other ergonomic products. Some might say, well, it's easy enough to put a few steps there, but now you're introducing another hazard with trips and falls. So within the environment, there has to be a whole analysis of risk. And ultimately, Bobby, I think what this comes down to is statistics and looking at the alpha versus the beta risk. And so I always like to use the example when I'm chatting with customers of going through the airport and having to pass through screening. And every now and then you get pulled off to the side and you get the old pat down. Well, that's your false positive. And how many false positives? How much disturbance are we willing to go through in order to offset the beta risk, which is the big problem that we're trying to solve for, the injury or the fatigue? So that's my opinion on it.
And then my very last one on my end is we've heard in the past a lot of talk of mandatory occupational or industrial exoskeleton use versus voluntary.
Sure. I believe it comes down to company culture, to be honest, as well as the risk associated with the task at hand. Certainly, if someone's working in a foundry, we see them having mandatory PPE to protect themselves against the blast furnaces. So it's an extreme example, but if you're doing 500 lifts a day with a product that averages 20, 25, 30 pounds, I would say that's as risky as working next to a blast furnace without any protection from the heat. So it's really just bringing it into the purview. But the difference is, I think the company's warehousing logistics is so prevalent that it's just part of everyday life, where if you're working at a foundry, that's a pretty specific niche where that's needed. And I just think that more thought, more attention has to be paid as to the extreme risk that people are putting on their bodies throughout the course of a work week, lifting those types of repetitions and weights.
Yeah, that brings up a great point. I think on one of our previous episodes, they were discussing like, hey, people have decided that safety shoes are important. People have decided that, you got to wear earplugs, even though they're a pain, right? To keep your ears safe, right? You got to wear safety goggles. Like, I think I made the analogy in the previous podcast that, yeah, sometimes you have to tell the students, put your safety goggles on, right? They don't want to, but you got to put your safety goggles on, right? And so I can't remember which one it was, Bobby, but someone was saying like, we need to create a culture in the US that your back is important, right? The safety of your back, you need to think about that over a 20-year period, right? Just get it into the culture. Like, as you just said, like literally, I just, didn't dawn on me, but you're right. Like 500 lifts a day at 20 pounds, do it 5 days a week. How we got to explain to people how risky is that and try to really get it into the culture.
I think I come at this industry from a different point of view because I've worked those jobs and I empathize. I've done warehousing for 5 years and I empathize with the people who are in that role. And as mentioned previously, I put myself in my 20-year-old shoes and I would have been a little adverse to change, to be completely honest. I would have thought it was cool. I'd have been the first one to try it. But understanding that this is a requirement now and you're expected to wear this from henceforth, it's a little unnerving for folks at times. And so, as we've talked about earlier as well, it's difficult to tell somebody the risk, the pain that they'll go through, the effect that this injury will have on your family, and help them see how this might offset the likelihood of injury. So yes, there's a cultural aspect, a cultural shift that happens, but there's also an educational one, as you pointed to, that's going to be important. And it needs to either come from OSHA or the company itself to do so.
It was a great conversation. Greg, we tell people, is there anything that we've missed that, you coming in, you wanted to get across to our audience?
No, my motivations for being on this, Tom, we've talked a few times over the last couple of years, and Bobby, we talk regularly. My goal on coming on this podcast was really, as I preached, help educate folks toward this. And I believe quite a few of our listeners are global and they're working within this niche. But if there's folks who are just tuning in, who are eager to learn about exoskeletons, or at least how we perceive the market and the industry, then just like with our exos, if I could help one person understand this a little bit better, then this time was valuable on my end. And in terms of something that we haven't covered, Bobby did ask previously about where we see the field going in the next 5 or 10 years. And I think that would be a fun one for the listeners to hear. And I'm talking to the right people to be able to collaborate on this conversation. So I made a couple notes, just my thoughts, certainly not the right answers by any means, but just my impressions as to where the market's headed with my limited experience. I do believe that within North America, we have the luxury, I'll call it, of being a slow adopter of this technology. And so what that means is that we can watch and learn from Europe and Asia as to what they're doing, what's working, how the market's reacting. I believe currently we're seeing pretty fierce competition over there and potentially even market saturation with the competitiveness. But ultimately, that's a good thing. That should drive prices down and make these more accessible to more of the population. With powered exoskeletons over the next 5 to 10 years, I think that they're going to become lighter. They're going to have lower profiles, longer battery life, and even offer as more assistance at prices that are extremely competitive with the passive solutions on the market now.
Yes.
We've seen that with companies over the last year and a half where people always talk about that watershed moment. I think we're in it just with the adoption of some of these powered recreational units. I also think the data is going to become paramount, not relying on clinical studies, but the data that's extracted within the exoskeletons themselves. And so we have partners that are doing this now. And even in Europe, we're seeing some of these passive vendors who are advertising this technology as an add-on capability of their passive solutions. So I expect to see more of that even sooner than the next 5 years, just with what we've been exposed to now. I think other companies could potentially take notice. And currently, it seems that most of the focus is currently on upper body and back, with some companies having niche spaces with the hands, the neck, combinations of body areas. Within the leg realm, units that are available for industrial use specifically for the legs. I think that we'll see some more offerings with that. The current situations that we're dealing with in those markets, the intent recognition, the latency, those are software changes. It's technological changes that are going to get honed in. So I expect pricing on those to come down and have more options, which is important to people. And I would love if there's any company listening to work out a suit for the bicep motion. So often we get calls from companies that get pain and strain from that bicep motion, and they lean toward one of the other upper body modules that really give you the support from chest level and above, but don't support this motion or the pushing and the pulling. Textiles that are rolled up on racks. There's a lot of arm injuries just from that. So if there are companies out there that are working on the bicep area, then all the power to you. Keep doing what you're doing, because it's very much needed within the industry. I would say that there are some barriers to entry in the field that are different from what we'll see in 5 to 10 years. Right now, knowing that it's a new technology, we're really working to make people believers and get it out into their line of sight. Down the road, I think that the acceptance, like any technology, people are going to know, hey, that's an exoskeleton. It works. And the drivers for integrating it are going to be much different, where it's based more on cost, but less regard put on clinical studies or other types of materials, which currently now that's all they have to consume. Failing to see a good analogy that I could use of that, but with any technology that comes out, It's the experts, it's the people that developed it that really drive that data. And that's what they do very well. It's our job now in the business and the industry world to help take their lessons, the data that they've given us, and provide it to the end users in a consumable format that they'll understand. And then I think the last point that I would drive home is that we'll have better longitudinal data. And that makes sense considering in 5 to 10 years, then we'll have actual long-term data. I believe that Europe, if I'm not mistaken, has different standards for their reporting from that in the US. And potentially one of the big reasons as to why we're seeing less of that data coming out of Europe. They're held to different standards. Tom, you're a professor, so I would have to lean on you to speak more intelligently about that statement.
Yeah, I think on the longitudinal side, it's tricky in the sense of, can you collect data or not? And so a lot of people, even the end users, right, they're scared that, you're collecting data on me, because really what you want to do is collect productivity data, right? And so people are scared of that. And understandably so. But your summary was outstanding. I mean, I think that, where the marketplace can go, talking about some of the recreational exoskeletons, pushing towards, price. And I really enjoyed it. It was a great conversation. Any thoughts, Bobby?
That was fantastic. I think a perfect example of what they've been telling us, to cut podcast segments and posting them separately. Like that's little where the industry is going in 5 years. That was flawless. And I'm in complete agreement with everything that you just said. I think that Tom and I are seeing exactly the same trends, where we are moving into an area where people want to have a number. They want to have, in addition to the impact of on the classical KPIs and key performance indicators, they want to have some numerical explanation as to how these devices are performing, regardless if it's augmented reality, virtual reality for business occupational use. We definitely seeing the price of the powered devices go down. Like you said, a lot of it is a software sensor issue, getting them to be responsive, getting them to act right away. And the consumer exoskeletons hopefully continue to take off. Tom and I were reviewing data yesterday. Everything seems to indicate that it's heading in the positive direction. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening. You basically got to get a mini market report just now on the trends and future of occupational exoskeletons directly from the field, not theoretical, but in reality, what is happening with integrating them, how companies are reacting, what is the motivation behind taking a risk with what is still a new technology. So thank you, Greg, for your time, for sharing your experience. And thank you, all of us, for joining us on episode 27 of our podcast.
Bobby, Tom, it's always a pleasure.
It's a great pleasure. And Bobby, I don't know if you did, sometimes at the end you thank your sponsors.
And thanks to all of our Patreon supporters. Once again, please go to the Exoskeleton Report, go to the WRA website, visit the Exoskeleton Store, especially if you're in North America or Canada. They will have the solution for you. And if they don't, they will let you know.
Yes.
Thank you for listening and have a great day.
You said Bobby Marino. You should say, yeah, you said Matt Marino.
Started with Matt Marino?
You said Bobby Marino, I swear. I'm just...
Coffee. Let's try more coffee. Intensify coffee.
A couple more.
We can have Tom do the introduction.
No. Can you...